Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff McNaughton, Senior Director of Industry and Theatrical and Programmer of Prime Time here at Tiff. I am thrilled to be able to present the world premiere of Colin in Black and White, and I'm so excited to be sitting down with director Ava DuVernay and writer Michael Starbury to discuss the series. Michael, Ava, welcome.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ava, I wanted to start with a question for you. I was hoping you could share your first memory of Colin and give viewers a sense of how your relationship began.
Yeah, no, we met at the Time 100 event in 2000, I think 18. We were both on that list. It's a beautiful event in New York City, and Colin Kaepernick was there. And so I went up to him, you know, he was coming up to me. He was like, hello, I love your work. And I was like, I love your work. Not the football work, because I don't know much about that, but the kneeling work and the activism, you know, and the resistance. And so we really bonded over that. I told him when he was in my city, when he's in LA, let me know. He'd actually emailed me and said, hey, I'm thinking about somehow, I want to start to tell a story. When I get out there, can we sit down? So I invited him to my home. We chatted and we talked about what would become the series. You know, that was the connection. It was all about how to tell the story and what he was willing to talk about at that time. He wasn't really wanting to get into what was going on with him currently, because all that stuff was pending litigation, but he still had something he wanted to talk about in terms of his life and how he gotten to the point that you see now. And so we started to create an idea where we would use his early life. And I started to love this idea of, you know, what does it take to make a singular American icon? I mean, this man has done something that's very singular in his resistance and the sacrificing of his career. And so I started to be really, to kind of just fall in love with, intoxicated by the idea of showing the steps to become who we are. And everyone doesn't have to be, you know, an American hero, which is what I call him. But we all are on that journey. And so we started to create something just in the very early stages that played with that unfolding.
And Michael, you've worked with Ava before. How did you get, how did you get the opportunity to work on this series, and how did that start?
Yeah, so I was sitting at home writing something else. Ava called me and said, Michael, I want you to write this Colin Kaepernick thing. And I said, okay. It wasn't really that tricky. You know, it was Ava called and, you know, I was a fan of Colin, also his off-field work. I do like football, but I didn't like what he did to the Packers back in the day. But I still wanted to be a part of it because, you know, I thought it was an opportunity to tell a story, just like Ava's saying, you know, we get to see kind of the genesis of this American hero. And I love that. I just think that was just such a great idea.
I suspect that there were many pertinent stories and moments of self-discovery from that period in Colin's life. And how did you draw out these memories with Colin and work with him to land on the ones that made it into the final product?
Well, it was tough. It was tough. I mean, I'll say I could have only done it with a partner like Michael Starbury. We had worked together on When They See Us. We worked on the final episode of When They See Us, which is a very muscular episode when it comes to emotion and tension. And this was a real different muscle. I mean, Michael Starbury is insanely funny, a very dry humor, funny guy. And so I'm always bringing him to the dark side. I'm like, hey, Michael, let's go do a show about prison. Hey. So this show was really lovely because it was, you know, using kind of, you know, the acts of resistance and kind of activism married with, which Michael very much cares about, married with really his voice. And that's what I am not funny. So that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to work with Michael. But the main reason is because he's just a lovely, lovely collaborator. And so to think about, you know, working with someone word for word, hand in hand, who could just take it and run with the idea. And also, you know, how I was feeding him information from Cap it was a perfect collaboration. We sat down, I had been sitting down with Kaepernick before Michael came on and recording him. And so getting a sense of the stories, and the stories were all kind of just lovely stories that would be seen as small by most people, right?
Mm-hmm.
The moment of the cornrows, or the moment, you know, when you didn't get on the team, things that many kids might experience, but through his lens of being the only Black kid in his community became really microaggressions, right? And the way that he's surviving this ongoing microaggression, this ongoing kind of erasure of his affinity for Blackness, right? In a space that, you know, did not, in which Blackness was absent, except for him. And so those ideas really were conceptual, along with the little stories he was telling. So our job was really to find some kind of form, and I know we'll talk about that, some form that allowed us to deal with both, because they were pretty far apart in a writer's world, right? You're either going to do the story of the adolescent, or you're going to do this kind of big, heavy stuff story. And so what we tried to find, and what I'm really proud that we found as a writing team, as a directorial team, as an editorial team, was the overall voice of it, which feels like a hybrid of a bunch of different forms. What do you think, Michael?
I 100% agree, obviously. You know, it was tricky. The nuance is the thing that was kind of exciting, actually. You know, the small stories and finding the subtext in those stories to kind of tell these universal stories, right? It's high school. A lot of high school is similar for people. But you know, through this lens, through the nuance, through the subtext, through Colin being able to be a part of the story and look at it in retrospect, you know, all of those things added up to what I think is just a great way to tell his story through, you know, kind of his voice. And we got to do it with levity, you know, I mean, so, you know, we humanized it. And I don't even really like using that word, because we're all humans anyway. You shouldn't have to humanize a human, I always say. But there's an audience that's going to see him like they've never seen him before.
Definitely. Ava, you were mentioning form, and another question for both of you. There's really three forms of storytelling, each at work in each episode. One is, you know, is more traditional, this linear story of young Colin. One is contextual, using these visual footnotes showing Colin's influences. And the third is very intimate, as Colin himself talks directly to the audience. How did you each find this balance between those storytelling techniques that are so pivotal to making it work as a whole?
It was a lot. Michael, you take that.
I mean, so it's weird, because it's almost like you're asking about kind of like the writing process. I think, you know, when me and Ava were first like the only people kind of like writers on it, we played with how it should be. We talked about old sitcoms and things we liked and what it could be similar to. And I don't know, we kind of just found this thing. It's a lot of, I don't want to put too, it's not a mystical thing. It's not something that was magical. It just took work. You know, you work on it, you work on it, you work on it until you find this thing. And it's just like, I think this is going to be the way to tell the story. And I don't know, I don't want to say we lucked into it. I would just say we worked into it.
I think I agree with you. And I think a lot of it, I know for me in directing the first one, it was hard, because it was three different styles. And I remember at points thinking, is this all going to cut together? You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't sure if I could cut it all together, you know, but I'm shooting Kaepernick in the gallery that we called it, which is really kind of the gallery of his mind as he's walking people through and he's sharing these stories. And he's looking through this window of his life, right? I remember building that gallery with my production designer, Scott Dugan, and he's like, so is this his mind? I was like, yeah. He was like, so should it be like, what should it look like? I was just a room. And so just like trying to figure out what that was. And then the motif, you know, then the idea of he's looking through the window, right, to his memories, but then also the fact that there's action happening in the gallery. So these little kind of, you know, vignettes that are happening with actors that I was directing in the gallery. So even within the gallery directing that, it's Kaepernick as narrator. And there's also, it breaks off into, you see the enslavement in the gallery. You see You see, I don't know what was in what episodes everyone watched, but there are other kind of vignettes with like little plays that happen in the gallery. And then you've got the graphic overlay. So there was this other piece, it's actually 4 pieces, where there was a whole graphic story going on. Where we pop out in like little mini documentaries. At some point, I've got my documentary researcher, I've got my graphic artist, motion graphics. I'm like, am I making it up? So I'm like, it's half doc, half plays in a gallery, half narration. He's like Rod Serling-esque 2.0. Then we got the kids then we got the linear story. And it was really, that's why I shout out the writing, directing, and editorial teams, because across my work with all of them, it was all this figuring out how it all works together. A lot of it in the writing, even more so in the direction with all the directorial team, amazing team of directors, and then editing,
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it, it really felt in many ways like the gallery was this art installation that you were taken into, and Colin was that guide in that space. And I guess a follow-up to that question is, why was it important for you to have Colin as that guide himself versus just a voice?
Yeah, we had played with just the voiceover, but it really came out of his willingness. He's like, I'll do it. And Michael and I were like, well, okay, if you'll do it, let's figure out how to do it. But his willingness to tell his own story from his face, right? So that it was a little different than I think some of the, a lot different than some of the kind of look back at my life narration. Maybe Everybody Hates Chris. I think The Rock, who I love, is doing one right now, where it's just the voice over. He was willing to make the time to kind of be in that space. And to walk people through it, to introduce these like vignettes that are happening in his space. I remember he first walked out on the gallery. I shot it in New York in the height of COVID. And he walked out and he saw the enslaved men in the gallery. And he started to just kind of, get pretty emotional about that. And, from that to the vignette with You All Have a Cool Herc vignette on episode 1, where you see the DJ spinning and he's like, so I'm introducing this stuff. It's like, yeah, these are the actors. He's meeting actors. He doesn't do any of this. So, he please ask me a question about how it was to direct him when you're ready, because I'll tell you about that. But his willingness to be there, I think, just made Michael and I want to jump in and figure out how to maximize his presence.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I love what Ava and all the directors did, but using him in that gallery, having him be able to use his own voice. I mean, if you Google Colin Kaepernick interview, not a lot of things are going to pop up. He's not a big time, talker like that. So to have the opportunity for him to use his literal voice in this show, I mean, couldn't ask for anything more. So yeah, it's great to have him.
Well, I'm not going to have you wait long to ask this question. What was it like directing him?
Okay, let me tell you. And this is my first interview about this project. So, I always say when you're starting out doing press for a project, your first interviews are crap because you haven't gotten like the answers down. By the time you see me in October, this is going to be like butter. Just bear with me. But it was extraordinary directing him because I'm not a huge football watcher. So it was extraordinary to learn how similar some parts of prep for football is for acting. So for a lot of times when I'm directing, we do blocking, right? Which is before we shoot, we talk about where the actor is going to go and where the camera will follow. So I'll come in on a rehearsal and I'll ask the actor, so you say this, where do you think you'll move? And I'll watch. Or I'll say, I really want this to happen by the window. So we'll move here. Does that feel good to you? So you do the blocking. So I'm really nervous. So it's Colin Kaepernick coming in. He's a non-actor. I'm like, he's not going to be able to remember the words and the blocking. This is a real actor thing that even some actors have a hard time doing. I forget he's a football player who does plays. So I say, okay, hey, Cap. All right. So I don't call him Cap. I call him Colin, but hey, Colin. So I'm thinking, let's just keep it simple on the first one. All I just want you to do is just walk in a straight line, hit this mark, maybe you'll land around this word if you feel comfortable. How does that feel? He was like, walk there and land there. It's like, yeah, if you can, if you can do it. He's like, okay. So he does it. I was like, oh, gosh, that was pretty good. Next one, I was like, so maybe on this we pivot here. And he was like, okay, then just here. Literally by the end of it, I had him turning, spinning, hit the word here, move around. It's like hardcore choreography and blocking that I would give to David Oyelowo as Dr. King and Selma, who, you know, played the Shakespearean kings on the UK stage. I mean, this guy had such incredible blocking, incredible timing, all the things that come from being an athlete, bringing that over into the film space. It was like butter. He was so great. I told him he should be an actor. I told him one day I'm going to write a screenplay for him. Or actually, I'll just call Michael and have Michael write it, where he can be the Black John Wick, because he would be incredible. I hope he does more of it. It was fantastic.
It sounds like he knew the playbook very well.
He did.
And adopted to it very quickly. You mentioned earlier the vignettes with like DJ Kool Herc. For people coming into this series knowing Colin's activism, they may expect to see parallels between individuals like Muhammad Ali and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, not necessarily figures like Allen Iverson or DJ Kool Herc. Why focus on these particular change makers?
You want to take that, Michael?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, Colin is a tremendously large Allen Iverson fan. As anyone, after you watch the first episode, you'll see that for sure. You know, with Colin though, and this is the thing about him, he's so much deeper than that surface level. It's easy to do Muhammad Ali, but he likes to dig deeper. He likes the idea of metaphor, meaning, you know, something. It's not all about the exact same thing for him. It's not Muhammad Ali and I do the same thing. It's, you know, who are these Black leaders that people don't know about, you know, these civil rights leaders, these activists who were doing things or trying to do things that could, you know, people need to hear about, that influenced him. So it was really just listening to him and talking to him about what moved him. You know, in that particular instance with Herc, he was a big hip hop fan, you know, so it made sense for me to talk about the rebelliousness of hip hop in that time, you know, and match that up with how Colin as a kid was learning to be a little rebel himself. So, you know, it just came from listening to him and wanting to kind of match his thought process and the type of people we mentioned.
And what made Nick Offerman and Mary Louise Parker the right choices to play Colin's parents, Rick and Teresa, in this?
Well, thank you for asking the question about them. Casting them was such a joy. One of the thrills of my COVID year was the casting of this show and handpicking every single actor. And I remember I've just been so attracted to Nick Offerman as a person in terms of who he is, you know, challenging my own stereotypes about, you know, what a person from where he's from that kind of does his kind of humor would be like. Such a beautiful, open-hearted, lovely, flexible, curious person who, you know, you're really looking for someone who can play the part, but also who's going to be able to be a part of a team that's trying to do a certain thing. Like I've done that before. We've cast the actor that's right for the part, but the energy doesn't quite line up to what we're all doing. They're just there doing it. No, I mean, Nick just became a part of what we were really trying to say, and he wanted to say it too. It means something to him. So he was fantastic to work with. And Mary Louise is just someone who I've been wanting to work with for a long time. She has a delicacy and a fragility that can sit side by side with like a fierce kind of no nonsense personality. And somehow in all her performances, she beautifully marries the two. That's what we needed for this. So they were really both, you know, top choices, and I couldn't believe that they both said yes. and then together on the set, they were just so, they became them even, you know, in between takes, they were just, you know, they were this couple, and they had a vibe, people who've been married for a long time and who still respected and loved each other, but also had challenges to connect with their boy. I loved them. They were great. I'm grateful to them for being a part of it.
And I believe I read somewhere that your mom actually had a cameo in When They See Us.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, because it's a strange thing to, you know, cast someone's parents. If someone was to give you the Colin Kaepernick treatment, Ava, who would portray Darlene?
Oh my gosh, I've never had that question in my whole life. She's a complicated lady. He is complicated. That's going to take some thought. But we can't talk about the cast. Thank you for that. She's going to love this question too. No, we can't talk about, leave this conversation without talking about Jaden.
Yeah. Right?
Jaden Michael, who was this golden kid that we found to play Kaepernick. Very specific needs here. We needed a kid who could play or look like he could play baseball, basketball, and football, because Colin was a 3-sport athlete at a high level, as you'll see in the series. And so, hey, most kid actors, they're acting, they're not playing ball. So it was then you needed the likeness, then you needed, and really most importantly, the chops, because this kid is going to be in every frame of the film. I remember my longtime casting director, Aisha Coley, saying, okay, tough order on this one. We did a huge casting call. We had local casting agents in multiple cities and countries. We went outside the country. It was an international search. And we found this great young man out of New York City, had never played any of these sports in his life. So he trained for 6 months, 4 months, to look like he could play basketball, football, and baseball. But not just that, not Hollywood trained. Colin Kaepernick is checking your tapes. Okay? He's saying, no, you got to hold the ball like this. You got to do this. He's giving notes. And this kid did it. I mean, he did it. Everything you see him doing, he did not know how to do 4 months before. And he immersed himself in that, in the text, in the story, in the history of Kaepernick, in the social stuff, the social history. He's just an incredible young man. You're going to be seeing so much more of him. I'm so happy that this is going to be an introduction to a lot of people for Jaden Michael and his talent.
Yeah, the moment I watched it for the first time, we have our Tiff Rising Stars program where we welcome 8 rising stars to be part of the festival, to really put a spotlight on them and introduce them and take them through labs. And instantly, probably 20 minutes into the first episode, I was like, he needs to be one of our rising stars. And he accepted, and we're so happy to have him. Yeah.
Yay.
So, it's amazing. Awesome. I have one last question, and it relates to what this series means for young adults. And at TIFF, we have a Next Wave committee. It's a group of 12 students ranging in age from 15 to 18, and they are selected from a competitive pool of young film enthusiasts across public schools across Toronto. And we reached out to them to ask them if they could ask both of you one question. What would they ask? And their response is this: what do you hope the following 3 audience types take away from the series? The first audience type being sports enthusiasts.
Are you going one by one? Go ahead, hit it, Michael. We have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, so for all our sports fanatics, the goal was not to get mocked on Twitter by the sports fanatics.
Very basic.
That's basic.
Wanted to keep it real.
I love it. What about current and future coaches?
Michael?
Current and future coaches watching the series. Make sure that you don't base your judgment of your players on stereotype. I'll go with that.
And final one, young athletes.
I would hope that young athletes come away with the the knowledge that they can be themselves on the court, on the field, and that they should bring themselves onto the court and the field, that they don't have to obscure who they are. The best athletes in the world bring themselves to the sport, whether it's Serena, whether it's LeBron, whether it's Magic Johnson, whether it's, Carl Lewis, whoever it is, they bring themselves. Flojo, you bring yourself. And to not flatten down, within the idea of sports. You can be a part of a team, but you can also be yourself, and to not shy away from that, just like Kaepernick.
Well, thank you both. That is a perfect way to end. And it's a privilege to have this series premiere at TIFF, and so grateful to have a chance to talk to both of you today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.